September 28, 1953, Kansas City, Missouri. It began as a Monday like any other. Children in neat uniforms hurried into schools. Mothers packed lunches. Fathers left for work. Life moved with the calm rhythm of post-war suburbia, steady and uneventful. But for one wealthy family, this ordinary morning would end in horror. And for the city of Kansas City, it would become a day seared into memory. 6-year-old Bobby Greenlease, the only son of multimillionaire car dealer Robert Greenlease Sr., kissed his mother goodbye before heading into his classroom at the Notre Dame de Sion Catholic School. Bobby was born into privilege. His father's car dealership stretched across the Midwest. His home was a mansion. His family adored him. In the eyes of the community, Bobby lived the life of a boy destined for comfort and safety. But by noon, Bobby would be gone forever. At 10:55 a.m., a woman walked into the quiet halls of the school. She claimed to be Bobby's aunt, her voice calm and steady. She told the nuns that Bobby's mother had suffered a sudden heart attack and that she had been sent to pick him up. The nuns hesitated, but the woman knew details, spoke with confidence, and carried herself like family. Believing her, they let Bobby leave with her. It was a choice they would regret for the rest of their lives. The woman was not Bobby's aunt. Her name was Bonnie Heady, a 41-year-old addict with a long history of arrests. Waiting outside in a car was her boyfriend, Carl Hall, a career criminal with a violent temper and a lifetime of failed schemes behind him. Together, they had planned the kidnapping of young Bobby Greenlease, and together, they carried out one of the most shocking crimes in American history. Carl Hall was not born poor. He came from a wealthy family, but squandered every opportunity he was given. Gambling, alcohol, and drugs consumed him. He grew resentful and reckless, living from scam to scam, spending years in and out of prison. By the time he met Bonnie, he was broke, bitter, and desperate. Bonnie Heady had once inherited a small home from her parents, but she was equally consumed by addiction. She drank heavily, abused barbiturates, and had fallen into despair. Alone, they were broken. Together, they were dangerous. Bobby was their target because of who his father was, one of the richest men in Missouri. Carl believed that by taking Bobby, he could extort millions and start a new life. But this was not the work of masterminds. This was chaos built on desperation, and it would soon turn deadly. After leaving the school, Bonnie drove Bobby across state lines to her home in St. Joseph, Missouri. But instead of keeping him alive as leverage, Carl Hall pulled out a gun and shot Bobby in the head. He buried the boy in Bonnie's backyard garden, covering the grave with freshly turned soil and flowers. At just 6 years old, Bobby Greenlease was gone. The ransom demand that would follow was built entirely on a cruel lie. Within hours, Carl and Bonnie phoned the Greenlease family. Their demand was simple: $600,000 in ransom money, the largest ransom ever demanded in U.S. history at the time. Adjusted for inflation, that ransom would equal over $6 million today. For Robert Greenlease Sr., the money was nothing. Saving his son was everything. He agreed without hesitation. But what Robert didn't know was that his son was already gone. The ransom was never about saving Bobby. It was about greed, addiction, and the reckless arrogance of two desperate criminals. As the Greenlease family scrambled to meet the demand, the FBI launched one of the largest manhunts of the decade. Agents tracked phone calls, interviewed witnesses, and monitored highways. Newspapers plastered Bobby's face across front pages. "Greenlease boy taken," the headlines screamed. Kansas City held its breath, praying for the boy's safe return. On September 29th, the ransom was prepared. $600,000 in carefully bound stacks, placed into canvas bags, and delivered exactly as instructed. Robert Greenlease Sr., paid without hesitation, desperate to believe that Bobby was still alive. Carl Hall collected the ransom and returned to Bonnie, bragging about the fortune they now possessed. But instead of fleeing quietly, Carl made a fatal mistake. He couldn't resist showing off. He flashed bills and bars, tipped heavily, and bragged about his score. Word spread quickly, and soon tips poured into police stations. On October 6th, barely a week after the kidnapping, Carl Hall was arrested in St. Louis. Days later, Bonnie Heady was captured as well. Under questioning, Bonnie cracked quickly. She led investigators to her backyard, where they uncovered the shallow grave of Bobby Greenlease. The nation recoiled in horror. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. Bobby had been killed almost immediately after his abduction. The trial was swift. In an era when justice moved quickly, the public demanded execution, and the courts delivered. Carl Hall and Bonnie Heady were both sentenced to death in one of the fastest federal trials in American history. On December 18, 1953, just 81 days after the crime, they were executed side by side in Missouri's gas chamber. Hall was 34 years old, Bonnie was 41. For a moment, the nation felt justice had been served. But the story did not end there. When authorities reviewed the ransom money, they found that nearly half of it was missing. Of the $600,000 that Robert Greenlease Sr. had paid, only a fraction was recovered. Somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 had simply disappeared. Rumors quickly spread. 2 St. Louis police officers assigned to guard the ransom money were suspected of pocketing bundles. Others whispered that Hall had hidden large sums before his capture. Some claimed organized crime figures had stolen it. The official investigation never fully explained the missing fortune. To this day, much of the ransom remains unaccounted for. The Greenlease kidnapping became infamous not only for the cruelty inflicted on a 6-year-old boy, but also for the corruption and unanswered questions that followed. It revealed cracks in law enforcement, exposed how addiction and greed could drive people to unimaginable cruelty, and raised uncomfortable questions about justice in America. For the Greenlease family, life was never the same. Bobby's mother withdrew into seclusion, her grief consuming her until her death. His father, despite his immense wealth, lived with the torment of knowing that money couldn't save his son. Their mansion became a house of sorrow, haunted by the memory of the boy who never came home. For Kansas City, the crime left deep scars. It was a story told in whispers for generations, a reminder of how quickly innocence could be destroyed. The kidnapping forced schools to rethink safety protocols, teaching staff to never release a child without absolute confirmation. It also changed how law enforcement handled ransom cases, setting precedents for federal involvement and rapid prosecution. Over time, the Greenlease case became one of America's most studied kidnappings. It appeared in documentaries, true crime books, and even FBI training manuals, not just because of the brutality, but because of the unanswered questions about the missing ransom. Was it stolen by corrupt cops? Buried somewhere by Carl Hall? Or swallowed into the shadows of the criminal underworld? No one knows for certain. Today, 70 years later, the case still lingers as one of America's darkest reminders. A child was taken, a family destroyed, and a fortune disappeared. Bonnie Heady and Carl Hall were executed, but their actions left behind questions that no courtroom could ever answer. The Greenlease kidnapping was not just a crime. It was a tragedy that exposed greed, corruption, and the fragility of innocence. Bobby Greenlease was 6 years old. His killers were executed. But the ransom, the largest ever paid at the time, remains partly missing. And that's why the case endures, still whispered about in Kansas City, still dissected in books and crime shows, still remembered as a moment when America realized how quickly greed could destroy everything. Bobby Greenlease was laid to rest in Kansas City. Mourned by a family broken by betrayal and by a nation horrified by what had unfolded. His killers are gone, but his story continues to echo, a chilling reminder that sometimes justice is swift, but closure never comes. The Greenlease Kidnapping, the ransom that disappeared,